Hello and welcome. You're watching News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. This is the Friday edition of Global Lens. As always, we have a packed show for you with all the top stories from around the globe. Our big focus continues to be on the Israel-Hamas war and its aftermath in the Middle East. In a major development that may significantly inflame an already volatile situation in the Middle East, the US and the UK militaries launched strikes against multiple Houthi targets in Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen on Thursday. This marks a significant response after the Biden administration and its allies had warned that the Iran-backed militant group would bear the consequences of repeated drone and missile attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea. US President Joe Biden said he ordered the strikes in direct response to unprecedented Houthi attacks against international maritime vessels in the Red Sea. In a statement, Biden said, "Today at my direction, US military forces, together with the United Kingdom and with support from Australia, Bahrain, Canada and the Netherlands, successfully conducted strikes against a number of targets in Yemen used by Houthi rebels to endanger freedom of navigation in one of the world's most vital waterways." He added that he would not hesitate to direct further measures to protect US personnel and the free flow of international commerce as necessary. US and coalition forces struck over 60 targets at 16 Iranian-backed Houthi militant locations. The Houthi assets included command and control nodes, munitions, depots, launching systems, production facilities and air defense radar systems. The strikes are an unmistakable sign of the growing international alarm over the threat to one of the world's most critical waterways. For weeks, the US had sought to avoid direct strikes on Yemen because of the risk of escalation in a region already simmering with tension as the Israel-Hamas war rages on. But the ongoing Houthi attacks on international shipping compelled the coalition to act, say US officials. Though the US has carried out strikes against Iranian proxies in Iraq and Syria since the outbreak of the war in Gaza, this marks the first known strike against the Houthis in Yemen. The strikes were from fighter jets and Tomahawk missiles. More than a dozen Houthi targets were fired on by missiles fired from air, surface and sub-platforms and were chosen for their ability to degrade the Houthis' continued attacks on vessels in the Red Sea, say officials. The Houthi attacks on Red Sea shipping on Tuesday are widely seen as the final straw that culminated in President Biden giving the green light for the US to move forward with these strikes. That day, the US Navy shot down 21 missiles and drones fired by the Houthis. There have been at least 27 Houthi attacks since the 19th of November last year. The Houthi attacks have forced some of the world's largest shipping companies to avoid the waterway, instead adding thousands of miles to international shipping routes by sailing around the continent of Africa. The Houthis, an Iran-backed Shia political and military organization that has been fighting a civil war in Yemen for close to a decade against a coalition backed by Saudi Arabia, have been launching drones and missiles at commercial shipping vessels in the Red Sea for weeks to express solidarity with Hamas since Israel launched the war on the terror organization in Gaza. Now, the Houthis' deputy foreign minister has said Yemen was targeted in a massive aggressive assault. Houthi leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi has said any US attack on Yemen will not go unanswered, cryptically warning that the response will be much more than attacking US ships in the sea. New explosions were heard in Yemen's western port city of Hodeidah even today. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said he doesn't believe the war in Gaza is escalating into a regional conflict, even as he warned of a lot of danger points. An important aspect of Blinken's latest trip to the Middle East was to tell regional leaders that if the US took military action against the Houthis, it should be seen as defensive, not escalatory. On Wednesday, the United Nations Security Council passed a US and Japan-led resolution condemning the 24 Houthi attacks on merchant and commercial vessels and demanding that the Houthis immediately cease all such attacks. Crude oil prices today were up more than 2.5% following the strikes by the US and the UK on Houthi targets. The global economy has taken multiple hits thanks to the disruption of shipping activity in the Red Sea, through which at least 12% of global trade flows, including 30% of global container traffic. The Houthis' attacks are forcing ships to take a far longer route around Africa, something that is expected to cause a major spike in prices of global commodities at a time of already sky-high post-pandemic inflation. The concern now is what the strikes against the Houthis could mean for the region. According to declassified US intelligence, Iran has been deeply involved in coordinating the Houthi attacks on commercial and merchant ships, including providing information about shipping vessels passing through the waterway. Among the US concerns about taking direct action inside Yemen is also the risk of upsetting a carefully brokered truce in the war in Yemen between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia. Some experts say a direct attack on the Houthis in Yemen is precisely what the militant group was aiming for, drawing the United States into direct engagement with itself and potentially committing its forces to a more prolonged conflict. Meanwhile, Israel is defending itself in a genocide case brought by South Africa at the International Court of Justice. The high-stakes hearing could potentially change the course of the war, but it may take weeks before judges issue a decision. Israel has told the UN's top court that it's taking action to minimize civilian casualties in Gaza and complying with international humanitarian law. Israel has argued that its right to self-defense was triggered by Hamas's 7th October attack. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has condemned South Africa's genocide case, terming it hypocrisy and lies.
We are fighting terrorists and we are fighting lies. Today again we saw an upside-down world in which the Israel is accused of genocide at a time when it is fighting genocide. Israel is fighting against murderous terrorists who committed horrific crimes against humanity. They slaughtered, they raped, they burned, they dismembered, they beheaded children, women, the elderly, young men and young women. A terrorist organization carried out the worst crime against the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And now someone comes to defend it in the name of the Holocaust. What brazen gall. The world is upside down and the IDF is the most moral army in the world, which does everything to avoid harming non-combatants, stands accused by the representatives of these monsters of genocide. The hypocrisy of South Africa screams to heavens. Where was the South Africa when millions of people were killed or torn from their homes in Syria and Yemen? By whom? By partners of Hamas. The world is upside down. Where were you? We know where we are. We will continue to fight the terrorists. We will continue to refute the lies. We will continue to uphold our just right to defend ourselves and to ensure our future until total victory.
The international community has repeatedly failed. It failed the people of Rwanda. It had failed the Bosnian people and the Rohingya, prompting this court to take action. It failed again by ignoring the early warnings of the grave risk of genocide to the Palestinian people, sounded by international experts since 19th of October of last year. The international community continues to fail the Palestinian people, despite the overt, dehumanizing, genocidal rhetoric by Israeli governmental and military officials, matched by the Israeli army's actions on the ground. Despite the horror of the genocide against the Palestinian people being live-streamed from Gaza to our mobile phones, computers and television screens, the first genocide in history where its victims are broadcasting their own destruction in real time in the desperate, so far vain hope that the world might do something. South Africa is here before this court in the Peace Palace. It has done what it could. It is doing what it can by initiating these proceedings, by seeking interim measures against itself as well as against Israel. South Africa now respectfully and humbly calls on this honourable court to do what is in its power to do, to indicate the provisional measures that are so urgently required to prevent further irreparable harm to the Palestinian people in Gaza, whose hopes, including for their very survival, are now vested in this court.
The consequences of not indicating clear and particularized specific provisional measures and not taking steps to intervene while Israel disregards its international obligations before our eyes would, we fear, be very grave indeed for the Palestinians in Gaza, who remain at real risk of further genocidal acts, for the integrity of the Convention, for the rights of South Africa, and for the reputation of this court, which is equipped with and must exercise its powers to afford an effective realization of the rights under the Convention.
The applicant has regrettably put before the court a profoundly distorted factual and legal picture. The entirety of its case hinges on a deliberately curated, decontextualized, and manipulative description of the reality of current hostilities. South Africa purports to come to this court in the lofty position of a guardian of the interest of humanity. But in delegitimizing Israel's 75-year existence in its opening presentation yesterday, that broad commitment to humanity rang hollow. And in its sweeping counterfactual description of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it seemed to erase both Jewish history and any Palestinian agency or responsibility.
As parts of its support for continued Israeli crimes in Gaza, the American and British enemy launched a brutal aggression against the Republic of Yemen with 73 raids, targeting the capital of Sana'a and the governorates of Hodeidah, Taiz, Hajjah, and Sada. The raid resulted in the fall of 5 martyrs and the injury of 6 other members of our armed forces. The American and the British enemy bears full responsibility for their criminal aggression against our Yemeni people. It will not go unpunished and unanswered. The Yemeni armed forces will not hesitate to target threatening sources and all hostile targets on land and sea in order to defend Yemen, its sovereignty and its independence.
So what do the US and British strikes on the Houthi rebels in Yemen mean for the region? To put that into perspective, we are joined by a panel of experts. Joining me on Global Lens tonight is Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, a well-known defense and geopolitical expert. Also with me is Chirayu Thakkar, doctoral candidate of international relations at the National University of Singapore. And completing the panel tonight is Irina Sukuman, national security and geopolitical analyst, who joins us live from New York. I will go across to my guests in just a moment to understand what these developments mean. But before that, a quick break here on Global Lens.
Ram's Ayodhya rebuilt. Ram Lala's Pran Pratishtha. Countdown to January 22nd. Dateline Ayodhya. Catch the mega coverage only on News9 Live.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let's go straight across to our guest, Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni. Welcome back to Global Lens. Let me start with you, sir. Now, US officials say that for weeks together, the US had resisted launching direct strikes against Houthi rebels for fear that the war might escalate in the region. But fact of the matter is, now the US and UK have gone ahead and done exactly that, targeted the Houthi rebels and their assets within Yemen. And the Houthis have said these attacks and act of aggression will not go unanswered. My question to you is, are we still to believe that the war is not escalating? Does it really look like the Israel-Hamas war is confined to Gaza? And are these strikes a matter of serious concern?
Neha, thank you very much. At the very outset, I must say yes, these are matters of concern, primarily because the strategic location around the Horn of Africa, you have the Djibouti base, military base, and we had even in 2017 our president give the first port call visit to Djibouti because of its strategic location along the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. This is definitely a matter of concern. There is no denying the fact, and all efforts must be made to de-escalate the situation, because all these Houthis, backed by Iran, are intentionally been doing all this primarily to disengage Israel from Hamas. Israel is determined to, if I use very strong words, eliminate and completely demolish the Hamas and do away with it, well, which is impossible because that ideology will still persist. But yes, there are some kind of, you could say the Prime Minister of Israel on and off been saying that we would not be occupying Gaza, and their intention is to make sure that the Hamas does not have any military capability, and probably they will even lose the political clout, if that be so. But yes, there is no denying the fact, but Houthis have been doing what they have been doing. About 27 odd targets they have done. They have on and off been targeting, and 15% of the world's shipping which passes through, and all of it, it's a gateway to Suez Canal. So in that context, I see that, as you rightly brought out in your initial coverage, that 2.5% of the global, the oil prices have gone up. At this point of time, this kind of things happening along, and rather than looking at de-escalation, it seems escalation. Could be Iran after the 2015 nuclear deal having been gone bad. Iranians definitely are the ones responsible for supporting the Houthis. What surprises me most, Neha, is the Djibouti base is not very far from there. Much earlier, they could have done whatever they wanted to do. You have in Djibouti French, you have the Japanese, you have the Italians over there, of course the Chinese. Even if the Chinese were not to participate, they complete, even the coalition of the United States, along with the most of them, with the Prosperity Guardian that they call that coalition to ensure the freedom of navigation is not affected. You find that in the Red Sea, the Houthis are intentionally seeing to it that there's no way until and unless Israel disengages itself from Hamas, they are not going to let down their attacks on the Red Sea, and the freedom of navigation will be affected by them. US is doing the right measure. According to me, there is no other way, because you cannot affect, because 55 nations are affected by it. If 55 nations are affected, and if that be the gateway to Suez, and that is the place where 15% of the world's trade passes through, is resulting in 2.5% or the rates of oil going up. It's time now to act against them. They should have been acted much earlier. And what I fear most is Iran. Iran, if it gets sucked into it, Iran will be the one which will be suffering, because obviously the only way right now, I go along with Mr. Blinken's advice that Israel must engage with the Palestinians. It's time that they engage with the Palestinians. It's time they disengage and try to make friends in and around their own country. That is the only way they can isolate Iran, because Iran is determined. Hezbollah, you have Hamas, and you have the Houthis. All proxies of Iran attacking the freedom of navigation, ensuring that the Israel and Hamas, the de-escalation does not take place. In that context, I sincerely hope it de-escalates and not escalates, but all actions are leading to escalation and wider war being extended to regions which we should avoid. Yeah.
Now, yes, that is the real concern, and you're right. Iran seems to be at the heart of it all. But as far as Israel disengaging with Hamas is concerned, the trouble is Israel is not in the mood to listen to anybody. As we speak, it is defending itself in a genocide case brought by South Africa at the International Court of Justice, given that more than 23,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza in this ongoing war. But let me go across to Chirayu Thakkar at this point. Chirayu Thakkar, as we know, that the Houthis' attacks on shipping vessels in the Red Sea were relentless. 15% of the international shipping traffic goes through this waterway. The global economy was taking a huge hit. Many would argue, as Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni seems to have done, that perhaps in the face of the growing provocation, the United States had no choice but to hit back. But given how things have unfolded, since the 7th of October, You have Israel and Hamas engaged in a seemingly endless war in Gaza. You've had Israel and Hezbollah exchanging fire on multiple occasions. You've had the US targeting, assets in Iraq and Syria. And now you have the US and the UK going after the Houthi rebels who've already vowed revenge. And as we said, at the heart of it all is Iran. Because all these elements, all these groups, from Hamas to Hezbollah to the Houthis, are backed by Iran. The question really is there now a very real threat of a serious conflagration, a much wider regional conflagration, with the war going way beyond Gaza now?
Neha, good evening. Thank you for having me. I think what you are raising is a possibility. You can never assign a zero probability to any of this happening. And if history tells us something, it's always a small incidence that leads to things much gloomy. But at this stage, I think I would rather not hazard in that direction and say that we are on the brink of it. Lieutenant General Saab made a very important point that there was no choice. US had to do it. A lot of world's shipping, as you pointed out, you provided various data points, passes through that narrow space, and therefore it was needed that it is securitized and the world's global flow of oil, goods, and whatever else is passing through remains safe and secure. But if you look at the American response, it is proportionate. We wouldn't say the nature of the attack is they are trying to escalate. If anything, they are trying to deter. There is a difference between a disproportionate attack that tries to, put both parties or both belligerents on the path of escalation, and there is a something else which is like a proportionate response. The US could have hit much harder, created more trouble, but at this stage, they just want to deter the Houthis and say that don't try to create a conflagration which actually sucks everyone into the war. We are not ready for the regional war. And even if you look at Iran, although Iran is like no dear chum of any of this, they are sworn enemies. But at this stage, even Iran does not want, at least it seems, to create a kind of a wider war in the Middle East that sucks everyone into it, including itself. It has its own struggles going on. So I think there is always a real possibility, and World War I and other cases in the history, if they tell us something, that it starts with only one assassination or one single incident that leads into something much ghastly, and there is always a possibility of sucking everyone into the war. But I think right now, today, as we stand, we are not exactly at the brink of it. However, how Houthis respond to this, how Iran instructs them to react to the situation, to the operation that United States and the United Kingdom has started with tacit support of other partners, I think that remains to be seen. And if Iran is mindful of the challenges, the economic challenges, the struggles that it has, because you also have to remember that, as has been rightly pointed out earlier, that Iran has to support Hamas in terms of its survival. It has to support Hezbollah, who can not only deter Iran from going northwards, but also provide the cover for the top leadership of Hamas, some of which who have now been in Syria and Lebanon and other places. And on the top of it, it has to create other pressure points to create pressure on Israel that it has to tone down its activism. If you see, essentially, the Houthi attacks are another pressure point. So Iran is already thinly stretched across a three-front situation with three proxy actors acting on behalf of it. So I think, at least in my opinion, that Iran would not try to escalate, but we still have to wait and watch how this unfolds.
Okay. The way the situation has unfolded since the 7th of October, one would perhaps say all bets are off. Let me go across to Irina Sukuman at this point. Irina Sukuman, is this a deterrence by the United States and the UK, or could this be a very serious escalation? Chirayu Thakkar says that Iran would not want a wider regional conflagration. It would not want to get directly sucked into this war. it knows that there will be a very heavy price to pay. But fact of the matter is that Iran has been continuously and relentlessly provoking Israel and the United States on multiple fronts. So the question I want to basically ask you is, how do you see the Houthis reacting or responding to the US and UK strikes? They have said these will not go unanswered. And how do you see Iran dealing with this emerging situation?
Well, the good news is, despite the fact that the Houthis and Iran have grown significantly in their capabilities over the past years, their forces, even combined, are still significantly weaker than the US and its allies stationed in the area. So these threats are disruptive, they're dangerous, they certainly can be deadly, but from what we have seen from US responses, they're not still overwhelming in their response. They're not Iran has indeed been trying to escalate, but only because there has been no pushback. It does not stand a chance in a direct confrontation with the US and others, even with the Houthis involved. That said, although both Iran and Houthis have tried to link the current developments to the Israel-Hamas conflict, this is not the first time we have seen escalations of this sort. Prior to the conflict, during the Trump administration, Iran has had a series of hijackings of commercial ships. It has attacked US drones in the area, and we remember that all of that stopped when the US finally conducted a cyber strike on Iranian capabilities. And Houthis themselves have a long history of attacking neighboring countries, including Saudi Arabia, UAE. The Houthis attacked a Bahraini base in September, killing several and injuring over 50 people. And that was before the start of this instant war. So to say that these actors only react to what US does or to what anybody does is incorrect. They're independent actors with their own geopolitical agenda. Houthis are a proxy of Iran. They have become much more dependent on Iranian training and funding, and they do respond to Iranian direction. So these attacks would not have happened if not for Iranian direction, and Iran is looking to humiliate the US. It is looking to show a lack of commitment by the Western coalition and to expand its maritime hold in the region.
All right. On that note, let's take another quick break here on Global Lens. On the other side, we'll continue this discussion on what these latest developments really mean and whether we could see a serious escalation of the conflict in the Middle East.
Pakistani spy agency ISI's sinister plan to target India. Training women to honeytrap top civil and military officials. Counter honeytrapping ops initiated by India. But gullible victims still caught in the web. Top military intelligence experts break down the web of deception. Colonel Hani Bakshi explains the phenomena of honey trap.
जहाँ पे भी आपको लगेगा, उनको लगेगा कि there is a person who is susceptible to women, who's making a lot of women friends on the social media. That is where they will make a spoof account and then start luring the person.
Colonel Pavitran Rajan decodes the psyche of the victim and the predator.
But when you go up the chain, no one enforces it to people at the top. That disciplinary regime and the security regime is not enforced at the top. And they usually have a public profile where it is much more easier to approach that person.
A News9 special on how modern technology has added teeth to the ancient spying tactic.
Our story takes you inside Pakistan's honey trap machine.
This and more, Streaming on world's first news OTT, News9 Plus. Download now.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met.
What certainly comes across is the lack of political will.
If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women, or the women reservation bill will need to be the needful?
Without any reservation, the women can fight.
And the gang issue is at the heart of it. And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface, but not the living people?
जानना है तो देखिए, समझना है तो सुनिए, सीखना है तो पूछिए, और कमाना है तो खरीदिए। जानकारी, सलाह और निवेश सब एक ही सुपर ऐप पर। पैसे का सवाल है तो जवाब है Money9। आजादी पैसे की। अभी डाउनलोड करें।
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let me go back to my guest, Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni. Let me ask you this question. As we talk about fears of a wider regional conflagration, the question is, how do you see the Houthis responding to the US and UK strikes? We know that they vowed revenge, but do you believe that these strikes could actually act as a deterrence, as the US is hoping? How do you see Iran reacting to this entire situation? Because there are many who believe that despite the constant provocations from Iran, it doesn't really want to get sucked directly into a larger war. But then there is another school of thought. There are those who say that with this, the Houthis have actually managed to achieve exactly what they were aiming for, which is to draw the US into direct engagement with itself. What's your take?
Neha, there is no denying the fact that the aim is to prevent the widening of conflict. Aim is to de-escalate between Israel and Hamas. That be what it is. Now, Houthis, look at the way you saw the spokesperson of the Houthi. He doesn't look a rebel. He looks like having a regular army. You see the kind of helicopters that they have and the kind of equipment. Obviously, rebels can't be having this kind of military equipment until they're backed by another country. And in this case, it's absolutely clear that the Iranians are backing the Houthi. The relationship between Saudi Arabia and Yemen, much that it's terribly bad. Now they're wanting to, try to make up for the good relations with Yemen and hoping, and that is how they're advising the US to de-escalate the situation. Now, in this case, you have the 5th Fleet in Bahrain. The US has its Eisenhower, carrier strike group Eisenhower, and the Royal Navy Diamond in the place from where the retaliations on how Houthis is going on. So much that the US can control it. There is no denying the fact. Yemen is the one country which is, and as I said, the Djibouti base itself, there are about 5,000 of the US servicemen at the Djibouti base. So whether it is the Strait of Hormuz, whether it is the Red Sea, or is the Bab el-Mandeb, or the entire the gateway to Suez is being managed and controlled well. Yes, the Houthis have done best is to draw the US into it. But then at the end of it, it is they who are going to suffer, nobody else. Rebels can't stand against the US fighters and the Tomahawk missiles, and within about 10 days you'll find that the Houthis will have given up. But what do we do? What are the options that are available now at this point of time? The only way, as I see, to de-escalate, prevent the widening of the conflict at this point of time is the Israelis have done what they had done. They have done enough, and I think everybody, look at the whole, in the entire game, you have the Iranians backing the Hezbollah, Iranians backing the Hamas, Iranians backing the Houthis. But the West Bank is staying as it is. It is not, the Palestinians are in the West Bank. They don't seem to be yet coming out in the fashion in which the Hezbollah, the Houthis and the Hamas are fighting the Israelis. It is working that way. At this point of time, and even I would go along with Israel, 30,000 tons of explosives been pounded on Gaza, and just see the casualties that have occurred. Well, it's extremely sad that over 25,000 people have died, over 70,000 people have been injured. There's no denying the fact, but it is much more than what was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. If that was so, if the Israelis actually wanted to completely exterminate and finish off the Palestinians, it would well have happened, but it hasn't happened. And they have not done it with that intention with which now the International Court of Justice is also trying to accuse. So in this particular case, if you look at it there, you find Israel is trying to hold horses to see that Hamas can give up. All that they want are those 100 hostages to be released. So that's the first thing. Everybody seems to be wanting to de-escalate. Look at the way Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group is there. You have the Royal Diamond over there, UK, the US, all the other countries supporting it, bombarding the Houthis in Yemen. All of it is happening. You find Israelis are striking Hamas. But yes, at this point of time, I at least would say that it is to deter, and to deter, the US has attempted its best. Iran should stay away from it. There is no denying the fact. Iran knows what it would happen. But yes, Iran also now, with the backing of China, backing of Russia, they seem to be feeling that yes, they can pressurize the Americans. And the Americans also have been got sucked into Israel, the Ukraine, Russia. So there is a lot of pressure on the Americans also. But there is only way out at this point of time is that the Iranians have to be told, lay off. The Houthis have to be told, have to be rather finished, because it's not very difficult, because they're rebels. They're not a country which needs so much. They are in Yemen, but they're after all rebels, and all of it can be done. You can't have piracy and all kinds of things being done with helicopters over there. Even Indian shipping has been affected. Even the Iranians have captured a ship called St. Nicholas, saying that, well, this particular ship was Rajan earlier, which had been hijacked by the Americans, to say so, that it had something like 9,98,000 barrels of the Iranian oil, and so many years later now they find that this is the ship which was repainted, went under another flag, and therefore has now been captured by Iran. So there's a lot of activities that are going on in West Asia, but the only way is to de-escalate, and de-escalate much lies with the world to pressurize, and especially the Iranians have to ensure that those 100 hostages have to be released. That alone will de-escalate the situation between Israel and Hamas, and there the Houthis, the Hezbollah and the Hamas pressurizing to de-escalate, to pull back Israel. Israel is not going to pull back unless the Hamas is going to either raise a white flag, surrender, or give at least release those 100 hostages.
Well, at
that
the moment,
doesn't seem to be working
clearly both sides are digging their heels in, and I don't know who can really tell Iran to back off, because its provocations have been endless. And as far as Israel's intent is concerned, yes, Israel says it is not intentionally targeting Palestinians or the civilians. It does not want to annihilate the Palestinian people. All it wants to do is to exterminate Hamas, the terror organization. While I will not get into the semantics of whether what's happening in Gaza amounts to a genocide, this matters before the International Court of Justice now, but we cannot ignore the fact that more than 23,000 Palestinians have been killed in this war, and at least going by the figures put out by the Hamas-controlled health ministry, thousands of them were women and children. Way too many people have died in this war. We certainly want to see a de-escalation, but how exactly is that going to be achieved? That remains a million-dollar question. Shirayu Tucker, let me ask you this question. Again, coming back to whether this will prove to be a deterrence. You believe it will be, but what do you think we can really expect the Houthi response to be? They have vowed revenge. They have the backing of Iran, which continues to provoke. Do you believe that the larger aim could be perhaps to suck the US into a more prolonged conflict? Is that something that you believe the Iranians and the Houthis may have been trying to do?
Neha, just a small clarification. What I tried to say earlier was that the United States is not trying to escalate the situation because it's not in its interest. The United States is trying to deter the Houthis
Trying
from
to, but the
creating.
question is, will it prove to be a deterrence? Because the Houthis have already said this will not go unanswered. So, while I understand the point that you're making, the US doesn't want to escalate, but will this prove to be a deterrence, or are we more likely to see an escalation? Also, do you think this could actually hurt the fragile truce between Yemen and Saudi Arabia, which had been brokered by the United States? There are many layers within layers here.
Exactly. As you rightly pointed out, the situation has been very delicate. And will it deter the Houthis or not? Of course, United States has preponderant power in the entire region, and it can deter any actor it wants. Now, the only question here is, what is the cost the Houthis are willing to pay? And at this situation, only United States and UK are there. But if others join, it will become much more difficult for Houthis to fight a longer coalition or a larger coalition of so many partners who are willing to deter it. But that is a different thing, and it all depends on what is the cost the Houthis want to pay. Another situation that is unfolding is that both the Houthis and the opposite side, the Saudis, they have signaled their intent that their ongoing truce process or normalization process that was going on between United Arab Emirates and Saudis on the one hand, the Houthis on the other hand, that will not be impacted by this ongoing crisis. So, in a way, the Houthis are also trying to create some sort of normalization. And Neha, you have to see in terms of this in a little bit of longer time period, that the Middle East was going through a process of normalization. The Saudis were talking to the Iranians, the Houthis were talking to the Saudis. Everybody was trying to be good with Israel and try to normalize and take the path of Abraham Accords. It was on a path of normalization, and it allowed the United States also to de-emphasize the region in its strategic priorities and focus a bit more on the Indo-Pacific.
Okay.
What the October 7 attack has done is, it has again brought the Middle East on the top of strategic priorities, at least for now, where United States had to use its preponderant power to make sure that this situation remains within limits. But what is the most important factor here is that the window of opportunity for Israel is closing. On the one hand, Houthis have started their own kinetic action. On the other hand, South Africa is doing a diplomatic offensive on ICJ. So the window of opportunity for Israel is closing, and the sooner that comes to an end, we can all talk about normalization and the pre-October 7th situation in the Middle East again.
Okay, so the window of opportunity is fast closing for Israel. Some may argue it closed a long time ago, given that thousands of Palestinians are already dead in Gaza. While we'll have to wait and see what the International Court of Justice has to say about the genocide case brought against Israel by South Africa, the bigger question really on everybody's mind is, are we likely to see the conflict widening in a sense, with more players getting sucked in? Nobody wants to see that, but we'll have to really wait and see how things pan out. On that note, Chirayu Thakkar, Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, Irina Sukuman, thanks so much for joining me on Global Lens tonight. All right, from the Israel-Hamas war and its fallout in the Middle East region, let's now turn our attention to the United States, where the 2024 presidential contest is hotting up. Where there is Donald Trump, can drama be far behind? On Thursday, the Republican Party frontrunner in the 2024 presidential contest brought the campaign trail to the courthouse during his closing arguments in the $370 million civil fraud trial in New York. Despite the warnings from the judge, Trump delivered campaign speeches both inside and outside the courtroom to blast the Attorney General who brought the case against him. Trump, being Trump, he didn't even spare the judge, attributing motives to him. Many say Trump's decision to launch into a monologue at the conclusion of his lawyer's closing arguments reflects the fact that the civil fraud trial could be a serious threat to his business and brand. New York Attorney General Letitia James is seeking to bar Trump from doing business in the state of New York. It's also quite evident that Trump is eager to take advantage of the situation, perhaps hoping to whip up sympathy for himself amongst his supporters as he gears up to run for president again. Judge Arthur Engeron has already ruled that Trump is liable for fraud in this civil case, and he plans to issue a full decision by the end of the month. Making his political speech in the courtroom, Trump said, "This was a political witch hunt. What's happened here is a fraud on me. We have a situation where I'm an innocent man. I have been persecuted by somebody running for office, and I think you have to go outside the bounds." Lashing out even at the judge, Trump said, "You have your own agenda. I understand that," at which point the judge had to tell Trump's lawyer, "Please control your client." Trump went on to say, "I did nothing wrong. They should pay me for what they put me through, what they've done to me reputationally and everything else." Now, the Attorney General's office argued in its closing presentation that Trump acted with intent to fraudulently inflate the value of his assets in his financial statements. They argued the buck stopped with Donald Trump. The Attorney General's office is seeking $370 million in its claim against Trump, alleging that his fraudulent financial statements allowed him to obtain loans and insurance at more favorable rates. Trump has also been charged with conspiracy, showing false financial statements, falsifying business records, and insurance fraud. Trump's lawyers have accused the New York Attorney General of a political vendetta against the former president. They've also made clear that they're planning to appeal the ruling, raising objections both to the case against Trump as well as the conduct of the judge and his law clerk. That means the case could stretch on, with the fate of Trump's ability to do business in New York hanging in the balance. Remember, this is just one of the many cases that Trump faces, including those regarding election subversion. As his legal troubles pile up, the former president and 2024 presidential hopeful has a packed court calendar in the months ahead.
If a president of the United States does not have immunity, he'll be totally ineffective because he won't be able to do anything, because it will mean he'll be prosecuted, strongly prosecuted perhaps, as soon as he leaves office by the opposing party. So a president of the United States, I'm not talking just me, I'm talking any president, has to have immunity. As an example, Biden could come out and you could get him on the border, you could get him on what happened in Afghanistan, a horrible, most embarrassing moment in the history of this country. You could get him on a lot of different things. You could get him taking cash from countries. You could get him on the prosecutor not prosecuting his son or the company or whoever it was, Burisma, in Ukraine. You could get him on that, where it was a quid pro quo, if you remember that. If they don't drop the prosecutor, we're not giving them $1 billion of U.S. funds. If you don't have immunity, you can, you won't be making any decisions. So you have to have it. And I liken it to the fact that police have to have their control back. They have to have respect. And you can always have a bad apple. You can always have something happen. But at the same time, you have to stop crime in this country. It's very much like that. It's very similar to that. But you have to have immunity for a president, and I think most people are seeing that. I've read a lot of legal reports lately and scholarly reports that are saying you really have to have a president of this country has to have immunity, or they're not going to be able to function in office.
Let's now turn our attention to Myanmar, a country that has seen considerable violence in recent years. Myanmar's military government and an alliance of ethnic armed groups have agreed to an immediate ceasefire following peace talks brokered by China. China's foreign ministry spokesperson said China hopes that the relevant parties in Myanmar can conscientiously implement the agreement, exercise maximum restraint towards each other, and solve all issues through dialogue and consultations. The two sides held talks on Wednesday and Thursday in Kunming, a Chinese provincial capital, and also pledged not to harm residents at the Chinese border. Myanmar's military, which overthrew an elected government almost 3 years ago, has been battling an alliance of ethnic minority armies fighting to end its control of their region since late October, with intense violence along the northern border with China. The military confirmed it had agreed to a temporary ceasefire. The clashes in northern Shan state posed the biggest battlefield challenge to the military since the coup and caused concern in China about the prospect of border trade disruptions and a refugee influx. In talks facilitated by China, the Three Brotherhood Alliance, which launched the Operation 1027 offensive against the military, agreed to ceasefire without advancing further. The United Nations says it fears thousands of people have been displaced by the fighting in Myanmar, with some fleeing across the border into China. Myanmar has been plunged into crisis after the military removed the government of elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi in February 2021. Within months, the military's lethal crackdown, on non-violent protests had sparked an armed uprising that has since grown to an unprecedented scale. Now, according to the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners, more than 25,000 people have been arrested for opposing the coup, and at least 20,000 are still in detention.
2024年1月10日至11日，在中方的斡旋和促推下，缅军同果敢、德昂、若开等3家缅北明第五组织代表在中国云南昆明举行和谈，并达成正式停火协议。双方同意立即停火止战，军事人员脱离接触，相关争端和诉求通过和平谈判方式解决。双方承诺不损害中方边民和在缅项目人员的安全。双方并就停火安排等其他事宜进行了协商，保持缅北停火和谈势头符合缅甸各方利益，也有助于维护中缅边境地区和平稳定。中方希望缅甸相关各方认真落实业已达成的停火协议，彼此保持最大克制，继续通过对话协商解决问题，共同推动缅北和平进程取得进展。中方愿继续为此提供力所能及的支持和帮助，发挥建设性作用。
And let's now turn our attention to Taiwan. Well, another place in the region that China is closely watching. Taiwan is gearing up to hold a crucial election on Saturday as voters choose a new leader under the shadow of an increasingly assertive China that has spent the past 8 years ramping up its threats towards the self-governed island. Many are wondering how democratic Taiwan's authoritarian neighbor will respond to the outcome of these elections. Remember, President Xi Jinping, China's most powerful leader in a generation, has called Taiwan's unification with the mainland a historical inevitability to be achieved by force if necessary. The last time Taiwan had a change of government, when the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, or the DPP, came to power in 2016, Beijing cut off most communications with Taipei and increased economic, diplomatic and military pressure on the island in the following years, turning the Taiwan Strait into one of the world's biggest geopolitical flashpoints. China's ruling Communist Party views Taiwan as part of its territory despite having never controlled it. While successive Chinese communist leaders have vowed to eventually achieve reunification, Xi Jinping has repeatedly said the Taiwan issue should not be passed down generation after generation, linking the mission to his mid-century goal of national rejuvenation. Now, all the three candidates in Taiwan's presidential contest are projecting themselves as the best choice for avoiding that doomsday scenario, pledging to maintain peace in the status quo, which polls have consistently shown is what most people in Taiwan want. They all cite the need to boost Taiwan's defense capabilities to deter China's aggression, but disagree on their policy priorities, particularly how to deal with Beijing. Now, China's response may vary depending on the election results, but experts say tensions could rise further down the road, regardless of who takes office in Taiwan, as China's reunification plan has become a non-starter for a vast majority of Taiwan's 24 million people. In addition to the threat from Beijing, livelihood issues such as low wages, high property prices and Taiwan's slowly growing economy are expected to be key factors in how the people vote. Now, in August 2022, China staged massive war games around Taiwan to show its displeasure with the then US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taipei. Beijing fired missiles into waters surrounding the island and simulated a blockade with fighter jets and warships in its largest show of force in years. Taiwan security officials say they don't expect large-scale military actions from China right after the election, citing unsuitable winter weather conditions, troubles in the Chinese economy and efforts by Beijing and Washington to stabilize ties following a bilateral summit in November. Meanwhile, Taiwan's defense ministry said today that it detected 5 Chinese balloons flying over the Taiwan Strait over the past 24 hours, one of which crossed the island, the latest in a spate of such balloons. The ministry says it has spotted over the past month. The ministry has accused China of threatening aviation safety and waging psychological warfare on the island's people with the balloons on the eve of the Taiwanese elections scheduled to be held tomorrow. That's the 13th of January. And finally, as we wrap up Global Lens tonight, let's get you this story from North Korea. Russian tourists are set to make history by embarking on a ski trip to North Korea, making them the first international travelers to visit the country since Pyongyang closed its borders in 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic. Russia's TASS news agency has reported that the development highlights the deepening cooperation between Moscow and Pyongyang. It follows the meeting last September between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and Russian President Vladimir Putin at a cosmodrome in Russia's Far East. The news report has surprised observers who had anticipated that the first post-pandemic tourist to North Korea would come from China, the North's major diplomatic ally and economic conduit. Now, the Kim-Putin summit had fueled speculation that North Korea might be supplying conventional arms to Russia for the conflict in Ukraine. The White House recently claimed evidence of Russia firing North Korea-provided missiles at Ukraine, prompting joint condemnation from the US, South Korea, Japan and others. As North Korea and Russia navigate separate confrontations with the United States and its allies, the former is gradually lifting pandemic-era restrictions and reopening its international borders to revive its economy amid persistent US-led sanctions. Well, that's all the time we have on this Friday edition of Global Lens. If you have been, thanks so much for watching. Have a great weekend ahead. Do join us again at the same time on Monday.
Why is the state not looking at putting an embargo on that?
And the state has not been able to handle that part of its own responsibilities.
It's not the fiefdom of politicians. They owe it to the people.
Everybody is as good a citizen as we.
As a Telangana person, I will not accept his leadership.
What was worrying was the stories that were coming from the Congress that there was internal sabotage.
You can't straight away give 12%. There is no provision.
Exactly.
You need to do a lot of other things.
Yeah, just because they are tribal, everyone does it.
Wait.
That's my problem. How do ordinary folks deal with this? Think about it.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met.
What certainly comes across is the lack of political will.
If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women, or the women reservation will need to be the needful?
Without any reservation, the women can fight.
And the gang issue is at the heart of it. And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface, but not the living people?
This was intended to be a terrorist spectacular without precedent.
The plan was to bomb 2 Air India passenger aircrafts simultaneously.
There was a loud explosion and the whole plane just vanished.
The police dropped the ball, the intelligence officers dropped the ball, and the politicians dropped the ball.
It was a conspiracy that destroyed my life.